Alan Grant crouched down, his nose inches from the ground. The temperature was over 100 degrees. His knees ached despite the rug layers pads he wore. His lungs burned from the harsh alkaline dust. Sweat dripped off his forehead into the ground. His entire attention was focused on the 6-inch square of earth in front of him. Working patiently with a dental pick and an artist's camel brush, he exposed the tiny L-shaped fragment of jawbone. It was only an inch long and no thicker than his finger. The teeth were a row of small points and had the characteristic medial angling. Bits of bone flaked away as he dug. Grant paused for a moment to paint the bone with rubber cement before continuing to expose it. "Hey, Alan!" He stood, a man of 40. He heard the chugging of the portable generator and the distant clatter of the jackhammer cutting into the dense rock on the next hill. He saw the kids working around the jackhammer, moving away the big pieces of rock after checking them for fossils. At the foot of the hill, he saw the 6 teepees of his camp, the flapping mess tent and the trailer that served as their field laboratory. "Visitor!" she called and pointed to the east. Grant saw the cloud of dust and the blue Ford sedan bouncing over the rutted road toward them. He glanced at his watch. Right on time. On the other hill, the kids looked up with interest. Grant started down the hill to meet the car. The visitor coughed in the white dust as he slammed the car door. "Bob Morris, EPA," he said, extending his hand. "I'm with the San Francisco office." Grant introduced himself and said, "You look hot. You want a beer?" "Jesus, yeah." Morris carried a briefcase. His wingtip shoes crunched on the rocks as they walked towards the trailer. "How long you been out here?" "About 60 cases. Morris looked surprised. He explained. "We measure time in beer here. We start in June with 100 cases. We've gone through about 60 so far." 63, to be exact," Ellie Sattler said as they reached the trailer. Grant was amused to see Morris gaping at her. Ellie was wearing cut-off jeans and a work shirt tied at her midriff. "Ellie keeps us going. She's very good at what she does." "What does she do?" "Paleobotany. And I also do the standard field preps." She opened the door and they went inside. The trailer had a series of long wooden tables with tiny bone specimens neatly laid out, tagged, and labeled. Farther along were ceramic dishes and crocks. There was a strong odor of vinegar. Morris glanced at the bones outside. "What are those?" Morris said, pointing through the trailer window to piles of large bones outside wrapped in heavy plastic. "Those are rejects. Bones too fragmentary when we took them out of the ground. In the old days, we'd just chuck them, but nowadays we send them for genetic testing." "Genetic testing? Here you go," Grant said, thrusting a beer into his hand. He gave another to Ellie. She chugged hers, throwing her long neck back. Morris stared. "We're pretty informal here. Want to step into my office?" Grant led him to the end of the trailer where there was a torn couch, a sagging chair, and a battered end table. Grant dropped into the couch, which creaked and exhaled a cloud of chalky dust. He leaned back, thumped his boots on the end table, and gestured for Morris to sit in the chair. "Make yourself comfortable." Grant watched as Morris primly brushed off the seat of the chair before he sat down. Morris opened his briefcase, rummaged through the papers, and glanced back at Ellie, who was lifting bones with tweezers from the acid bath at the other end of the trailer, paying no attention to them. "You're probably wondering why I'm here." Grant nodded. "It's a long way to come, Mr. Morris." "Well, to get right to the point, the EPA is concerned about the activities of the Hammond Foundation. You receive funding from them." $30,000 a year, Grant said, nodding. "For the last 5 years." "Well, what do you know about the foundation?" Grant shrugged. "The Hammond Foundation is a respected source of academic grants. They fund research all over the world, including several dinosaur researchers. I know they support Bob Carey out in Tyrrell in Alberta, and John Wheeler in Alaska, probably more." "Do you know why the Hammond Foundation supports so much dinosaur research?" Morris asked. "Of course. It's because old John Hammond's a dinosaur nut." "You've met Hammond?" Grant shrugged. "Not actually. He's quite elderly, you know. An eccentric, the way rich people sometimes are, but always very enthusiastic over the phone. Why? Well, the Hammond Foundation is actually a rather mysterious organization. He pulled out a Xeroxed world map, marked with red dots, and passed it to Grant. These are the digs the Foundation financed last year. Notice anything odd about them? Montana, Alaska, Canada, Sweden. They're all sites in the north. There's nothing below the 45th parallel. Morse pulled out more maps. It's the same, year after year. Dinosaur projects to the south in Utah or Colorado or Mexico never get funded. The Hammond Foundation only supports cold weather digs. We'd like to know why. Grant shuffled through the maps quickly. And there are other puzzles. For example, what is the relationship of dinosaurs to amber? Amber? Yes, it's the hard yellow resin of a dried tree sap. I know what it is. Why are you asking me? Because over the last 5 years, Hammond has purchased enormous quantities of amber in America, Europe, Asia, including many pieces of museum-quality jewelry. The Foundation has spent $17 million on amber. They now possess the largest private-held stock of the material in the world. I don't get it. Neither does anyone else. As far as we can tell, it doesn't make any sense at all. Amber is easily synthesized. It has no commercial or defensive value at all. There's no reason to stockpile it, but Hammond has done just that over many years. Amber? Grant said, shaking his head. And what about this island in Costa Rica? 10 years ago, the Hammond Foundation leased an island from the government of Costa Rica, supposedly to set up a biological preserve. Well, I don't know anything about that, Grant said, frowning. I haven't been able to find much. The island is 100 miles off the west coast, and it's very rugged. They call it Isla Nublar. Morris searched in his briefcase. The reason I mention it is that, according to the records, you were paid a consultant's fee in connection with this island. I was? Morris passed a sheet of paper to Grant. It was a Xerox of a check issued in March 1984 from InGen Incorporated, Fairlawn Road, Palo Alto, California, made out to Alan Grant in the amount of $12,000. At the lower corner, the check was marked Consultant Services Costa Rica Juvenile Hyperspace. Oh, sure, I remember that. It was weird as hell, but I remember it. And it didn't have anything to do with an island. Had you heard of InGen before? No. How did they contact you? Telephone call. It was a man named Gennaro or Giannino, something like that. Morris nodded. Donald Gennaro, he's a legal consultant for InGen. Anyway, he wanted to know about eating habits of dinosaurs, and he offered me a fee to drop a paper for him. Grant drank his beer and set the bottle on the floor. Gennaro was particularly interested in young dinosaurs, infants and juveniles, what they ate. I guess he thought I would know about that. Did you? Not really, no. I told him that. We find lots of skeleton material, but we have very little dietary data. But Gennaro said he knew we hadn't published everything, and he wanted whatever we had. And he offered a very large fee, $50,000. Morris took out a tape recorder and set it on the end table. Do you mind? No. Go ahead.